Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining CHEAR Seminar.
Can you hear us okay? Great. Sorry, Joanne.
Okay. Dr. Christina Weiland is a professor at the Morrison Family School of Education and the Carl and Martha Cohen Professor of Social Policy at the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. She co-directs the Education Policy Initiative and directs the University of Michigan's pre-doctoral training program in causal inference in education policy research. Her research focuses on the effects of early childhood interventions and public policies on children's development, especially on children from families with low incomes. She holds a doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. In today's presentation, Dr. Weiland will present on the impacts of Michigan Transitional Kindergarten through third grade. Transitional kindergarten or TK programs have been expanding rapidly, but there is very little research on their effects. This talk will cover or will offer new insights into the Michigan's TK program, including impacts on the early learning landscape, key program features, and the effects on children from kindergarten through third grade. Dr. Weiland, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share slides. Okay. All right. Does that look good on your end?
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for having me and really us, our team this morning as we talk about the impacts of TK through the third grade. And if you're in Michigan, right, and you're wondering what is TK, it has a lot of names throughout the state. So raise your hand in the room if you have a kid in young fives or have had one. Yeah, me too. Okay, so locally it's known as young fives, but across the state you might also hear begindergarten or developmental kindergarten, and so we went with a more nationally recognized name, which is transitional kindergarten, but that's what we mean when we talk about this. Other states tend to use more of the TK language. And this is joint work with Jordy Byrne, who is on the call this morning and will, chime in with questions and any corrections as the kind of sharp econ PhD candidate about to graduate, who has done a lot of this work. Brian Jacob, also here at Michigan, and then Anna Shapiro, who was a PhD student here at Michigan, is now at Rand, and then Tarina Muscadee, who was a postdoc here at Michigan and now is at Mathematica. Okay. And this was funded by the Smith Richardson Foundation as well as the Institute of Education Sciences. So, when we use data from the state of Michigan that we get through our MEDIC Center, our Michigan Education Data Center, we show this sort of standard disclosure to make sure folks in the audience know these are our opinions and not those of the state. In this audience too, I think this is a really good ad for the kinds of data that we have at the Ford School at the at MEDIC. And so if folks get interested in a research project using educational data from the state of Michigan, we are always happy to talk to you about that. Okay. So I'm going to back up from Michigan Young Fives or TK to a broader picture, which is that in our country, we're really clear from lots of evidence, decades of evidence, that opportunity gaps start very early, pretty much at birth or before, in terms of mothers' access to healthcare. It varies so much by income. Okay. And in education, we actually have data following kids as they go through the public school systems that shows that down the line, we know we're going to see very large gaps in academic skills between children from more and less advantaged homes. But if we back up to the very early years, we can actually see that most of those long run disparities that we're going to see in high school, they were already in place on the first day of kindergarten. Okay. And we know that one of the contributors to this is access to high quality early childhood education. So kids from families with lower incomes are less likely to go to any kind of preschool. And when they do get access, they tend to go to lower quality programs. Now, the good news is we can change that. We have examples, including at large scale around the country, of high quality early childhood investments moving the needle on kids' readiness for school, as well as decades of evidence that show that these benefits eventually can pay off, but don't always, into adulthood. And this is just a plug for our book, Cradle to Kindergarten, that covers all of this in great detail. If you get more interested, it covers the full 0 to 5 policy scale, landscape. Okay. So we have this good news that early childhood education can move the needle. States have really struggled on their own to offer these high quality experiences, though, to all the kids in their state. So we have a lot of variation, a very fragmented landscape in terms of who's eligible for what. It depends on where you live. It depends on risk factors that may be part of your family's experience as well as your family's income. But at this point, we do have most states are offering some sort of state-funded pre-K option for 4-year-olds that is targeted by income, and some do universal. And we say that because that is the landscape in which TK programs have expanded. They're now in about 5 states across the country. They're not well researched, which was why we were so keen to do this work here in Michigan, because now in Michigan, about 13,000 kids per year go to these programs. Okay. And in Michigan, as we'll show you in a few slides, we really restrict this based on age, which has historically been the case in other places that offer it too. And we don't really restrict them based on income. So far, California's TK program is the only one that's been rigorously evaluated. And so there was a large-scale study that in 2017 showed these large effects on kids' skills at kindergarten entry, some of which lasted through the end of kindergarten when this study stopped following the kids. And that was a super interesting data point because actually 80% of the control group were in other kinds of preschool programs. And so there was something special about TK. It always matters like what kind and what are you comparing it to, that there was something sort of interesting and intriguing about the California study. Since then, there have been some other studies that have followed kids like into 1st grade in one district. That's the DOS 2019 study showing good effects there. And there's been one study with 5 districts in California that suggests no impacts into 3rd and 4th grade, which isn't terribly unusual in early childhood. We often see a boost in kids' skills, and then the control group kind of catches up, and then we see reemergence later on in some studies. But in a larger sample of districts, Rucker Johnson, economist at Berkeley, is seeing lasting effects on those same outcomes. Okay, so there's something definitely at least suggesting that TK in California is having these interesting effects and is worth kind of further investigations. But our study in Michigan is only the 2nd state to look outside of, say, California to see if the same is true elsewhere. So in our work in Michigan, we have been focused on understanding who gets access to the program and who enrolls, how it interacts with other early learning options that are on the ground here already, because it's not rolling out as the first such intervention in the state. And then how is it benefiting kids' outcomes we've followed them at this point through the end of 3rd grade, though we hope to do more. So in terms of the TK programs that we have in Michigan, we have this district opt-in model. So basically how it works is that the state will fund kids at the same rate as they do for K-12 if the district decides to offer it to some of the kids in their within their jurisdiction. Okay, now that makes it actually the best funded early learning program in the entire state. So it's funded much higher levels than, say, Head Start or our state-funded pre-K program. It's entirely school-based in its design, so only places that are a public school can offer it. We can't put it in community-based centers by statute. It's full day and 5 days a week. Teachers have to meet the same educational and certification requirements as their K-12 counterparts and are paid just as well as the kindergarten teacher next door to them. That is not true for our other early childhood investments for preschool in the state. We often see that to teach pre-K, you have to make about 30% less than a kindergarten teacher and other options in the state, but the state's trying to make progress on that. And I'll talk about the age criteria, which also is one of the things that's the same. You have to be 5 on or before December 1st in a given school year to enroll. But there are not, at the state level, any other restrictions on who can enroll. Now, there isn't a lot of data on TK programs in Michigan, just as there are in other states. And so we actually had to do our own surveys of teachers and administrators across the state to figure out exactly where was it and what were the features. So there's a lot of wide latitude that's given over, first of all, do you offer it at all? And then what do you do if you do have a program? And so you can see this map of Michigan shows you where in 21-22 it was offered. And ultimately, based on population densities in the state, about 2/3 of Michigan kids that year were young kids, lived in a district in which it was offered. Okay, but not all of them. And in terms of the program features, one of the things that we learned is that when districts offer it, they tend to offer it in every elementary building, right? They could just have one classroom in one elementary school, but they don't. So almost 2/3 of them are offering it in every elementary building. We also saw that when they do target it, when they don't offer it everywhere, they tend to put it more in their schools that have a higher share of economically disadvantaged kids. They are not mixing in with kindergarten for the most part. It's capped at 19 students. They get about the same PD as the kindergarten teachers down the hall, and most of them are serving kids who also have an IEP, so they have a diagnosed disability within their general education classroom, so inclusion. So Michigan at the pre-K level ranks in the bottom 10 for inclusive preschool. So this was an interesting finding too around how TK is fitting into the inclusion preschool landscape. The mix of curricula that are used in TK are really different than in state pre-K. So most state-funded pre-K and Head Starts in our country use comprehensive curricula that purport to cover all early learning domains, but that are regularly outperformed by other options in randomized trials. TK doesn't have to use a comprehensive curricula. The district gets to decide. And so there we see a really different mix where they're using more focused literacy, math, socio-emotional curricula overall, and sort of piecing together to cover all of those learning domains in a different way than we tend to see in state-funded pre-K. Now that could be good or bad, which is why we're doing the student outcomes work particularly. It could kind of be overwhelming to patch all of that together. Or it could be good because you're not using these curricula that don't seem to work as well as some other options. And so that was part of the interest area here, was documenting how is this different, and then what do the effects for kids seem to be. Okay. This is a map that essentially shows you how the age cutoffs work here in Michigan. And again, this was really similar to California in its early years, although California has gotten now to universal TK for all 4-year-olds. So, this can evolve over time in states as well. But so how this works, and so for the folks in the room who do have a kid in young fives or have had one, this might be very familiar, but essentially leading up to the kindergarten cutoff in a given year, we have the green kids, okay? So these are the kids who basically can just go down the street to Baugh Elementary or whatever elementary school in Ann Arbor, and they can enroll in their local neighborhood school, okay? And their options there are really to go to kindergarten with no sort of waiver process. It's sort of the business as usual way to get into kindergarten. For some of them, they could also choose to do transitional kindergarten as redshirting. And so by statute in the state, that actually is across the full range of birthdays, but some districts decide to curtail it. So some might say you have to turn 5 like a May 1st or later. Some may say June 1st or later. So that depends on where you are, to the degree to which that's an option for you. But that is one of the roles of TK in our state, is to actually be this kind of publicly funded redshirting option. And then, of course, you can do anything else because kindergarten's not required, right? You can go to a private school, you can stay home. There are lots of options too, since we don't have a kindergarten is not mandated in Michigan. Then we have the blue kids. So they're going to be turning 5 on September 2nd or later, right? And so they've technically missed the traditional kindergarten cutoff that we now have in Michigan. They can go to kindergarten, that's that first bar, with a waiver right here. And so basically their parents sign some paperwork. And so as long as they turn 5 by December 1st, they could go to kindergarten. They could also go to TK because it has a December 1st cutoff if their district offers TK. They could go to GSRP, our state-funded pre-K program, if they qualify, or any other option, including staying home with a family member. Okay, so when we get to the child impacts, which is where we want to spend most of our time today, we're going to be looking at the impacts of TK. We're going to have 2 treatments there turning on at the same cutoff, and we'll tell you how we're going to deal with that. But our impacts for kids are really about that December 1st cutoff. Okay. And the broader research where we've done papers so far to kind of establish the landscape of what's happening with TK in Michigan, we have looked at how the districts and charters that offer it are different than those that don't, how the kids differ in districts that offer it, based on whether they enroll or not, and how it impacts other early learning options, and then the last question, which is about outcomes that I'll talk about. Okay. And our analytic approaches across these research questions. So we're using a range of really simple descriptive statistics where we're just saying of these schools that offered it in 21, 22, or these districts that did, how did they differ on characteristics within districts that offered TK? It's very descriptively mean comparisons. How did the kids who were eligible and enrolled differ from the kids who were eligible and did not enroll? And then we do to look at how it's affecting other options on the ground and enrollment and other things. We do an event study and a cross-sectional difference in difference analysis. And then finally, we do the regression discontinuity that's looking at the impact of just making it across the line, that December 1st birthday cutoff for TK versus being born on December 2nd or later and not getting access to TK. Okay. And so just to summarize, because I think we think these findings are super important to understand the impacts on the kids. So we've previously published that districts that offer TK do serve more advantaged students. And so they're more likely to be in suburbs or town, less likely to be in rural areas than districts that don't offer it. They serve higher shares of white students and students who are not economically disadvantaged. And from our interviews with leaders across the state, including those who don't offer it, one of our kind of key findings here is the way in which like the opt-in model for TK means that some districts are being left out. So we got questions from some of those districts about, well, how do I start one of those programs, right? And there are findings in Washington State, which has been expanding its program too, that have these sort of similar trends of, it seems to be perhaps the more advantaged districts that are getting to this first. Then within the districts that offer it, this is a full range of kids. So both the red shirter kids and the kids who are kind of substituting this in their preschool year, we do see that about 22% of kids are enrolling. They're really diverse. And so there's a mix of families that if your district offers TK, again, down the street at Burns Park Elementary or Angel or Pattongill or whatever, that you see a diverse mix of kids come into the program. There are some differences where, you know, boys are more likely to take this up and white and Latino kids and their peers. We also see differences where it's more popular really as a fall option than as a red shirting option, which makes some amount of sense in terms of families deciding, oh, I think my kid really is eligible for kindergarten, even though they have a July birthday. Versus the October kid, you know, their option may be otherwise paying for a preschool program, and this way they don't have to pay. So we do see some differences there in terms of enrollment. And then finally, in terms of how it's impacting other early childhood options, what we see here is that basically it is moving kids out of other programs and into TK, and it's also increasing red shirting among all students. And this is sort of just a taste of those findings, but essentially for economically disadvantaged students before their district is adopting TK, there's really no difference between districts that have this and that don't in terms of enrollment and things like GSRP here. That's the blue bar. But after TK adoption, you see, kids moving into TK. This is this elevated black bar with a confidence interval, and they're moving away from early kindergarten and somewhat away from GSRP, the state-funded pre-K program. And for non-economically disadvantaged, you see them really moving into TK and away from early kindergarten. They largely weren't eligible for GSRP, so that's what's going on here. But interestingly enough, because Michigan has lots of families that don't attend preschool, we don't see a dip in overall GSRP or Head Start enrollment in the state. So basically, TK is moving kids from one program to another, but then other kids are just filling up those other slots. So its overall impact on the landscape is more kids in Michigan are getting a publicly funded seat in the year before kindergarten. Okay, so the student outcomes is the paper where we wanted to go into the most detail because it is the one that just about a week ago we sent off to the state for review and are hoping to get out for publication, but still have plenty of time for good questions to improve what we're doing and how we're interpreting our findings. So here we're focused on following kids through the end of third grade, looking at the impact of TK on their third grade state tests on the M-STEP. So that's going to be math and ELA. There's special education placement in each grade from kindergarten to third grade. We also do these summary indexes from kindergarten to second grade or K to 3 here that I'd be happy to talk in more detail. It has to do with when you have to be required to be reassessed at what cut point. Under the IDEA law, around age 8, you have to be reassessed in most states for whether you can continue to receive SPED services if you had an IEP earlier. We also take advantage of some data that are partially available for one of our cohorts, which is the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, or the KRA. So this was a direct assessment for the most part that entering kindergartners were given. This is a validated assessment used in other states as well that gives you an overall metric of kids' school readiness along with subscores on important domains like language and literacy, math, social skills, and their physical and motor development. And so I'll have some robustness checks about exactly how this was administered, but basically we have this partially for one of our cohorts that I'll focus on today. Okay, so we are using this MEDIC data that, again, we are the warehouse for this at the Ford School, the Education Policy Initiative. And so this is student level administrative data. We're going to focus on kids whose pre-K year was 2014 or 2015 or 2018, 2019. We are skipping the cohorts in between because their third grade test scores were disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So sadly, we are not able to use them. So our power isn't quite as good as what we would like here. And we also have found that as the way that the TK enrollment is reported in districts isn't always correct. And so we have a long process in which we discovered this, called up all of the districts in the state to try to understand it better, and then restricted the districts that are really reliably reporting TK enrollment. Okay. And then the KRA is only for the second cohort and for a subset of districts. The state was in the middle of kind of rolling this KRA assessment out across the entire state. It wasn't quite there yet, though it was most districts by 2018, 2019. And then this assessment was canceled entirely in the pandemic. Okay. I kind of highlighted at the beginning that one of our analytical challenges here that we're going to do some work to solve is that we have two treatments turning on at the same cutoff. So we are using a regression discontinuity design in which the key assumption is that you have essentially at some predetermined cutoff, a random experiment right around that cutoff. Right? There's really no difference in expectation between kids who were born on December 1st and December 2nd. I have a child who was born on December 1st, who is now in Young Fives, right? And so that was really kind of down to the timing of his own timeline rather than a decision that my family made around when he was going to arrive. So that is kind of the intuition that we're using here, is that there's this random variation around the cutoff in which we can get to the TK effect. However, because families also have this waiver option, we're going to have to do a little bit more work to isolate the effect of TK, to separate it from the early kindergarten enrollment effect, okay? So within districts that do offer the program, we see that about 37%, those are the blue dots, are in TK. These are the eligible families, versus 17% have waived into early kindergarten, okay? So how we're gonna be able to back out then the effect of TK given two treatments turning out on at the same cutoff is we're going to take advantage of the fact that the intent to treat effect, so the effect of being born on December 1st or just a little bit earlier, is really equal to a weighted combination of the effect of TK and early kindergarten for those who actually enroll in those. So that's the effect for compliers, or the local average treatment effect. And so here what we're showing is that this ITT is equal to this weighted combination where each of these are the weights, or the share of students who actually comply, who actually enroll, okay? And the green pieces are things that we can use, that we can identify just using the districts that we know offer TK. But the red pieces, which is separating the effect of going to early kindergarten versus the effect of going to TK, we have to, again, do this a little bit more work, okay? So we end up in this equation with one equation and two unknowns. And so if you think back to your Algebra 1 training, that is not good, right? So we aren't able to solve this equation when you have one equation and two unknowns. So we have to apply a little bit more structure. And so we are basically going to find a way to recover one of these two things, the effect of just early kindergarten, so we can back out the effect of TK. And how we're going to get to this late EK is we're going to look at the districts in Michigan that do not offer TK. So in those districts, the only thing that's happening at the cutoff is the jump for early kindergarten. Now, an assumption that we're going to have to make here is that the effect of early kindergarten is the same in TK and in non-TK districts. We show that in our paper that actually the districts are pretty different who offer TK versus don't. So we also have another approach in which we only assume it's the same within demographic cells, which represent combination of race and ethnicity, sex, and economic disadvantage status. And so basically this is what we call the relaxed assumptions approach, where we're relaxing this effect that there's one effective EK across the state as another way to estimate the effect of TK. Okay. So back to pictures, which will hopefully help clarify this. So what's going on in our non-TK districts? As I said, there's only one treatment turning on, which at the cutoff, which is this early kindergarten enrollment. We see about 35% of kids in the districts that don't have TK, but by state law do allow this early kindergarten waiver. They're enrolling in early kindergarten. And on the other side of the cutoff, it's none. And in the TK districts, again, we have this situation where we're about 37% of kids who are eligible for TK at the enroll in it at the cutoff versus 17% are in early kindergarten. Okay. So this is what we're going to take advantage of to try to figure out the effect of EK in districts that don't offer TK. Okay. And how this is going to work too in terms of getting to the outcomes, these help hopefully give some visual intuition for the method. But essentially in non-TK districts, when we fit these regression discontinuity models in which essentially there's a random experiment right around the birthday cutoff, we find this negative effect of going to early kindergarten. So basically, if you go to early kindergarten, you're taking the state standardized test when you're a year younger essentially than kids on the other side because they have to wait a year to take it. So a lot of that just comes down to really cognitive development of being a year older. But when we fit the models for TK and we're not separating out the effect of early kindergarten and TK, we see it's actually positive. So the fact that this is so negative for the non-TK districts, but we see this positive effect of the TK district implies that the effect must actually be positive. Okay. And indeed, that is what we see. And so these are our third grade test score impacts, and we have math here at the top along with English language arts. And we have our baseline approach where we're assuming the effect of EK, early kindergarten, is the same in TK and non-TK districts. And here's where we're relaxing that assumption. And what we see is that there is a effect on math across these models. It's quite notable. It's about a third of a standard deviation, or 20% in some of the more conservative, the estimate with the smallest magnitude here. We see suggestive evidence that it's also boosting ELA scores, but these are imprecise and smaller, so we can't say for sure that that's the case. We're hoping to add more cohorts to have more power here to test this further. An important way to sort of contextualize this too is that really when you look across all of the preschool programs that we've studied rigorously in this country, at the end of preschool, we tend to see about a 0.25 standard deviation difference, and that's been studied since the 1960s. And so to have this kind of effect in third grade with a TK program is pretty interesting, especially considering that the model differs a lot from the typical pre-K program in the country. Okay, this is special education. So what we see here is that we have panel A, our baseline approach, panel B, our relaxed assumption approach. And we're seeing that, it's about 10% of kids who go to TK do have an IEP. That's what this means in TK. Obviously, the control group's not in TK, so that's why all of this is blank. But as they move into kindergarten, we do see this spike in our baseline approach and a larger magnitude, but not statistically significant in our relaxed assumptions approach, where basically they're more likely if they went to TK to have an IEP. And this makes sense and aligns with some of the other research that they've been known to the school longer. And so often folks in schools are ready to kind of diagnose kids in these districts or in these programs if they've known them longer than if they're giving them more time to adjust to the schooling environment. But by the end of first grade, we're seeing that go down quite a bit, and it's no longer statistically significant. It starts reversing in sign in second grade and is about -7 percentage points. So that TK kids are less likely, though it's not statistically significant. The p-value here is just over 0.1. But it's reversed really remarkably in magnitude, at least across this period. And these summary measures sort of show the same thing, where there's really no difference across kindergarten to second grade or K through third grade, but they do differ in sign if you put third grade into the mix. Okay. Now, kindergarten readiness, this is just the one cohort, but essentially what we're seeing here is that kids who've been to TK are scoring much higher on kindergarten readiness than their peers who did not. And so these are in effect size metrics. So these are really very large. We do show 3 bandwidths or windows from how far out from the cutoff we're going to estimate this effect, to give you a sense that there is a little bit of sensitivity in terms of the magnitudes here to what window we're choosing. But nonetheless, this is also kind of corroborating our third grade story that indeed there's a really large difference at the beginning of kindergarten based on the best data that we have that would suggest that our third grade story makes some sense, right? So it wouldn't, if it were the case that we saw no impacts on kindergarten readiness and then large impacts in the third grade, that would be very weird. And so this is a more kind of typical trajectory in the literature around what you see at kindergarten entry and then what do you see a few years later. Okay. We also do our best to kind of come up with, what is the counterfactual? And so I won't spend a lot of time here, but we do know that about our best estimates or suggestions, about half the kids are in other kinds of preschool programs who are not getting access to TK. So remember in California, as I'd mentioned in the initial study there, it was about 80% of the kids. So this is another really important thing to always keep in mind with early childhood studies is that in the old days, kids, if they weren't in a given program, were really mostly at home. And nowadays they're increasingly in some other kind of program, which is the case here in Michigan too. Okay, just looking at my time check. Okay. So we do extensive robustness checks, and I just wanted to give you a taste of this with the KRA in the paper. And essentially, we've kicked the tires in many ways on the results that I've just shown you, and we aren't really able to break our main story. This is actually looking for the KRA because the way it was administered, districts had choice around whether they gave it to every kid or whether they gave it to a random subsample of some kids in the classrooms. And then there was no one actually monitoring that it was indeed a random group. So we had a lot of questions about these data and looked at them in a lot of ways. And one of the ways is around whether the district chose to give them to everyone in the classroom, like more than 90% or some lower threshold. And the main takeaway here is that across these three bandwidths, so how far out from the cutoff are we going, even when we change what the coverage threshold is, we're still seeing very large effects on kindergarten readiness if you've been to TK. We've also restricted the sample so that you have to have both the KRA and the M-STEP, so you had to take both. And there too, we see even larger impacts, and on ELA, it's at the trend level of significance here, and these are compared to, say, all the students with M-STEP scores. If anything, the results get stronger. So a couple of implications and next steps, and then I'd love to open it up to questions. And again, Jordy Byrne is here too, and we'd love to kind of get feedback as we're pushing this paper to publication. So, where we are with this is that we undertook this project because these are expanding rapidly across the country. And they're different from the typical state-funded pre-K model or Head Start in many ways. And so they're an interesting interjection into what kind of preschool should we be expanding. That said, we don't know the mechanisms here, right? Like what are really the active ingredients that you would have to see these kinds of impacts. And so here, this is the strongest program in Michigan in terms of teacher pay. And so, is that really the secret sauce here? Is it that they use really different curriculum than state-funded pre-K and Head Start do? In Michigan, at the time we were studying the program too, the state-funded pre-K program was largely 4 days a week and had a shorter year. So is it about dosage? Is it some sort of combination of these things? Those are the studies we really need in this country around how to get these programs right. But nonetheless, sort of at its sum total, it is different and does have a different pattern of impacts than other state-funded pre-K programs. Most immediately, we did have a grant under review at the Institute of Education Sciences, which is no longer going to be reviewed there, where we were going to expand to 5 cohorts and go through the end of 3rd grade and then hopefully even beyond that. We've also been in conversations kind of internally about how we want to get into classrooms to observe the practices, because that has not been done in TK since California about 10 years ago. And so these have been expanded without data on exactly what is happening within classrooms. And we're hoping to fill that gap going into the future as well. Okay, I'll stop there to leave plenty of time for questions. And Jordy, do you want to just unmute really quick and say hi so everybody knows you're here too?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Jordy Byrne, as Chris said. and I'm a PhD student in economics here and one of the co-authors on this project.
I'll start. Thank you for that talk. It's very interesting. I had two questions. One is about cost effectiveness. It seems pretty clear that oftentimes with social programs, you can invest a lot of resources and show evidence of efficacy on some outcome, which you have done. And I'm wondering, is there a way to say, well, this approach is more cost effective than alternative approaches that you might take, to kind of boost student outcomes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say a really great recent example we've had of this is there was a study of New Haven pre-K by some economists at Princeton. And one of the things that they did that none of us have been able to do except them, because we do these studies in other places besides Michigan too, is they got access to parent income records. And so what they were able to see was that there were no lasting effects of the program of getting access through a lottery to this pre-K program versus not on any of the child outcomes through the 8th grade. But there were these impacts on parent earnings that actually made the program pay off. That were sustained like through 6th grade. The parents were earning more in a way that made the program cost effective. So it's a really good question, and it's a place to really kind of try to push because there are ways for programs to be cost effective if you're providing childcare, even if we're not getting to the learning outcomes. I don't want to ever give up on the learning outcomes because we've really got to close these early learning gaps that are so consequential down the road. But that's an example of like the kind of work that hopefully we would be able to do. They were able to get the names of parents and then work with the state to match them to tax records. So that was like a very, very cool study that we're not close to doing, that we have talked a little bit internally with leadership in Michigan about, whether that would ever be possible here around linking to parent earnings, where presumably some of those benefits would be coming from.
Well, that's interesting because isn't that an argument for universal essentially childcare, right? More than universal pre-K.
You could say that. I would say that, we have places like Michigan that show you can actually do both, right? So you could get benefits both from the parent earnings and from the child learning, right? And so, we've often had this false dichotomy in this country that like publicly funded programs are either for parent work or for child learning. And it's sort of silly because the kid is going to be somewhere else in either of those models. So why wouldn't you try to capitalize on really closing those early readiness gaps?
One other question is regarding generalizability. So it sounds like that some districts in Michigan decided to adopt TK and some did not. And
Yes.
I'm wondering about like some the selection issues that may be inherent with that. Like, I guess it's really a question of, do you think that if all of those non-TK school districts took up TK, do you think your findings would generalize, or do you think that there's something inherently different about those districts that would make your findings not generalized?
Yeah, Jordy, you want to take a swing at that one? It's a great question.
Yeah, sure. That is a great question. I think the simplest answer maybe is that we don't know. We can't say given our analysis, right? So we can only estimate the effect of TK for the districts that have chosen to have a TK program. And we know, just looking at observable characteristics, that, like you said, that the TK districts and the non-TK districts are different. And so, one of the kind of just the high level differences are that places with TK tend to serve more economically advantaged students and might have more resources. And so, just speculating, it could be the case that if districts that don't have TK have fewer resources, maybe it's harder to implement a TK program that's quite as successful, and maybe that's why they haven't implemented the programs already. We don't know that though, and I think it's difficult for us to actually try to extrapolate or predict exactly. But that's just kind of one speculation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one way we might get at it is if we were able to get to those 5 cohorts, and we're seeing kind of across cohorts, the districts are different because it continues to expand, right? We might be able to test something related to that around the first cohort, which is in fewer districts versus the last that's in more, looking at kind of, the district characteristics, like is the impact different in different kinds of districts, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, another one quick last thought, sorry, is that, I gave one example of why impacts could be smaller in those districts. It could also very much be the opposite, that in those districts where people are less economically advantaged, the impacts are bigger because, it's a pretty common finding in the literature that the effects of early childhood education tend to be bigger for children from families with less income.
Yeah. And I'll just plug Jordy's dissertation. He did this really fabulous study of universal pre-K in Georgia, and actually found that there was really no difference between more advantaged and less advantaged areas, right? Which we were shocked by. So it really, it's hard to have really strong priors around exactly what would happen here, because we have a like kind of a mix of findings that are often surprising across this literature at the moment.
Curious with the impact of COVID. So I know you didn't include the people who were like in COVID, but is it their thought that the impact of COVID has lasted beyond COVID? Does that make sense? So even like the people who are coming in after COVID, like, does it have an impact on them? Like it seemed to like because less teachers are returning or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so if we can expand to the 5 cohorts or more, hopefully we would be able to look at some of those sorts of questions, because and another team that Jordy's done some work with us too on Boston pre-K, we've been following kids to the end of 8th grade, and one of our big questions there, our cohorts were between 8th and 11th grade, like well after the pre-K program had ended, but it's probably pretty different if whether the effects of COVID hit you in 8th grade than 11th grade. I think there's reason to think that those could be different. And so here too, it could be the case that TK or any of the early childhood programs are differentially effective now, like post-COVID, when there are worker shortages or teacher shortages and those sorts of things, and the schools are seeing more behavioral challenges in classrooms. But yeah, we don't know.
Thanks for the great presentation. Excuse my sort of ignorance. I was trying to sort of read those tables, and it was a bit difficult. If you were to summarize so having had a kid who went to Young Fives, I struggle with the idea that one can predict future sort of test scores as an outcome years down the line versus kindergarten readiness. So if you were to summarize your findings, because I could see a dissipation over time, trying to sort out in my mind that the kindergarten readiness versus the school test scores in 3rd grade. Would you say that you expect a sort of a sustained effect of TK all through 3rd grade in terms of test scores? I struggle with that being a possibility, because I don't know if that's at least in my mind, what TK is all about. It's, because we can't predict cognitive maturation, neither can we predict test scores based on, your whether you go to TK or not.
Well, so just to clarify, like just around the word predict, we're not predicting the test scores. These are their actual test scores in the 3rd grade, and the difference between whether you went to TK or not on the basis of your birthday, like right on either side of the cutoff. So it's not a prediction model, because we do have those in early childhood and in other, parts of research. So it's the actual differences that we're seeing. So we are seeing much bigger differences at kindergarten entry. And so generally what we see is that, in early childhood interventions, that's often the case, that there's this difference if you went to preschool versus didn't, but then the control group catches up, okay? And sometimes they catch up entirely by third grade and sometimes partially. And here we're seeing that they have partially caught up, but there's still this lasting benefit of TK on third grade test scores. And so that, just to clarify, that is the finding. You know, and we would want to hopefully see some catch up of the control group. We wouldn't want to kind of like keep holding them back the whole time because they're in the same classroom. The whole same social processes are going to be affecting them as the kids who didn't go to TK. And we even have one study by Jane Waldvogel, an economist, showed that actually having more peers in your kindergarten classrooms who'd been to pre-K meant that the other kids benefited more. There could be these spillover effects that kind of get lost sometimes in models too. Does that help a little bit around kind of what we're seeing? So these are actual differences in the third grade that suggest some lasting benefits of TK.
Yeah, thanks. But is that an expected finding that if a child goes to TK, their third grade scores will be different from those who didn't? Is that something you expected to see?
So sometimes, like if we take the Head Start Impact Study, so that was 2002, it was the first large scale nationally representative study of Head Start, and kids were randomly assigned to go to Head Start or not. So those effects, even though there were impacts at kindergarten readiness, they were really gone by first grade. Okay, and in third grade, there were really no differences. Okay, so that is sometimes what we see, especially at large scale with early childhood studies. And so these seem unusually persistent in Michigan, in TK. And again, California, there's some mixed evidence, but it may have that pattern as well in the larger study that was able to get to more districts. We're seeing that too. That TK seems to have this more durable effect than maybe some larger scale current studies. Now, that said, there's a whole debate around whether things in the medium term matter. So we have really good studies that show that you can even have total convergence from third grade onwards, like no difference between treatment control and test scores and those sorts of things. But you can see still down the road impacts on things like high school graduation, going to college. So the whole fade out debate is a pretty hot topic without really clear signals of like, when should you get worried? So if you don't see anything in third grade, should you be really concerned? And again, we have studies that show not seeing anything from third grade to 11th grade on test scores, but then we see these like impacts on high school. So it's a mixed picture.
Thank you.
We have a question online from Tiff. This was so interesting and the modeling approach was so elegant to tease apart the effects of age. Apologies, this has already been asked. Are there data around social emotional outcomes from TK? Maybe tricky since districts don't collect that data. It's a great question. Thanks.
Just the KRA, just a kindergarten entry. Yeah, so sadly, we are missing a lot of things that would be really interesting to know about a functioning down the road. And so sometimes in those kinds of studies that do use administrative data, they start relying on things like discipline, suspensions, and absenteeism, those sorts of things to try to get at these like kind of proxies for student behavior or school engagement or whatever, that's sort of the best you can do unless you kind of go out into the field in education and really gather those data yourself.
Do we have any other online questions? Let's make sure, let's see if anyone else has some. Okay, go ahead.
So, two other, sorry, I'm just like, I'm really fascinated with this idea of like, kind of linking, your data, or just this concept to other kind of domains, right? Child health is very siloed. We often think about like one set of outcomes. Of course, here at CHEAR, we think a lot about healthcare utilization. And I'm wondering, part of me would be fascinated to, kind of say, okay, do we see that the introduction of TK affected some, kind of measure of healthcare utilization that might be beneficial? So ADHD diagnosis is like one of them, right? So there's that whole literature about like how that have used RD designs to basically show that basically your likelihood of being diagnosed with the ADHD, increases abruptly right at the school cutoff because kids are younger when they come in and the teachers perceive them to be inattentive, and that gives them more likely, and so you almost wonder, like, by having TK, option by essentially by reducing the option of early K, right? Do you have a potential salutary effect on overdiagnosis of ADHD in the kids who go into TK? So it just kind of makes me think that like it would be really great if we could find, this would require administrative data linkage at the state level, but basically to link the kids who in TK districts that enrolled in TK and just kind of essentially just somehow link to their healthcare utilization records. It would be really, really fascinating direction.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. I agree. Hopefully, I mean, part of why I like being in CHEAR is learning more about what health data are available and thinking about how we might in the future be able to better link some of these things. I think the best we can do just with the educational data, we've talked about, breaking SPED down into specific kinds of diagnoses. So we would be able to do that with just the education data, but I think we could get a far richer picture with what you're talking about with this.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having us. And again, if people have thoughts after the seminar, where the state's reviewing the paper now on the impacts on kids, and we have time to improve it. So please follow up with us. We'd love it.
Why is the state reviewing the manuscript?
Oh, yeah. So they make sure we don't screw up. That's the good thing. We really appreciate their feedback. So as part of the MEDIC, and so this is something like if people come and use our data, they kind of do a fact check for us, which is really helpful, and ask questions for anything that's unclear. So they don't have control over what we say. It's not like they get to say, no, it was effective or it wasn't effective because we don't like the program. It's nothing like that. They don't interfere, but they do make sure that we've kind of gotten terminology and these things correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Think about our papers too. All of our Michigan Medicaid papers, anything that uses state data, not as like a you can't do it way, but like oh, that's not actually what that variable was way, which is very helpful.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you all.